Hello there! So last week was the Booktubeathon and I will link my TBR video for that down below. I said in that I had the week off. I was positive that I was going to read at least 7 books. I did read 7 books, so this is the wrap up for that. I'm going to get into it because there's a lot to talk about. So, firstly, I started the week with Twilight by Elie Wiesel. This was one of the books that I tossed a coin for, which was one of the challenges. This is a book that has been on my shelf for a long time and I wanted to read it for a long time. Predominantly, I want to read Night by Elie Wiesel. I think that is a true account of his time in a Holocaust camp during the war. So that sounds really devastating but interesting. I got sent this one and I thought I would give it a go for this. It's not the thickest, although it has got quite tiny writing, so it did take the whole of the first day to read. This basically looks at a Jewish man writing letters to somebody who he believes rescued him during the war, and it kind of flits about all over the place. So we start out when he's in the future writing this letter to this man who rescued him. Then we jump to when he's a child and when his family in Poland are torn apart by what's happening, and it basically just looks at the treatment of Jews in the war, the way that the war split families apart. It was difficult, this book, because I wanted to love it. I wanted to love it because the writing is good, do not get me wrong, the writing is fantastic. And there are really strong scenes in here, especially the part in the beginning when the Nazis first come to Poland and this little boy is having to deal with his family suddenly being in a very different position. But then I just feel like it tried too hard to be a little bit nonsensical, sort of in the theme of, I suppose, Kurt Vonnegut. And I can understand why, especially as a Jew who was in that situation, I can understand why Elie Wiesel would want to do that, why he would want to sort of make things a bit nonsensical. And also, you know, war is nonsensical, etc. But I think it kind of didn't help the plot at all. This was kind of messy, it was jumpy, there were a lot of strands that weren't really explained or didn't really seem to have a place. For instance, when the child is young, he ends up going into hospital with an illness and he sees a man with sort of really nice eyes, kind of like a prophet kind of person, a wise man, and he crops up a few times in there, kind of like his spirit or a guidance, and he helps the boy out of a few awkward and difficult situations and crops up at various guises in his life. But it kind of just doesn't really lead to anything. It's just mentioned off the cuff a few times. I don't know, there was a lot of stuff like that in here, and having read the reviews on Goodreads, a lot of people said the same thing. The way that this made me feel was kind of that I didn't get it. But ultimately, I think if a book leaves you feeling like you didn't get it, it's not done it well enough. And also, yeah, as I say, reading the reviews, a lot of people seemed to have the same issue. I think this would have been better if it was just written chronologically, and got rid of the nonsensical stuff, because there is so much strong stuff in here, but ultimately it was only a 3-star for me. It was a little bit disappointing, though I will still be hunting out Night. Then I read a reread, which was my book for green on the cover, which was Dandelion Wine by Bradbury. I won't say a great deal about this because I have reviewed it in the past. I will link that down below. Warning, that is a very, very old video. It's probably not good. I'm not going to rewatch it, but I will link it down below if you're interested. This is a fantastic book. It's kind of a semi-memoir, but it is fictionalised, and it's about growing up in Illinois. We follow a boy called Douglas Spaulding, and it's during the summer holidays, and we basically just look at the adventures that Douglas and his brother have during the summer. We also look at the things that happen in the town around them, and it's kind of a very poignant summer for Douglas because it's the summer that he becomes aware of death and mortality. 2 of the people in the neighbourhood die during the summer, and there is also a situation where there's a man going around killing women. So all of these things kind of work together to make Douglas reflect on his life and realise that one day he will die, and it's just so impactful and fantastic, and it's got this vivacious just excitement for life that I think most of Ray Bradbury's books have. I would highly recommend this if you haven't read it already. Then I read another reread, which was Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal by Jeanette Winterson. I've been wanting to reread this for a while, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity. This is a memoir about Jeanette Winterson growing up in a Pentecostal adopted family. Her adopted mum and her had a very complicated relationship, where her adopted mum would say things like, "The devil has led me to the wrong crib." She was very obsessed with the idea of the world coming to an end and the repentance that they had to seek for that to happen. And Jeanette kind of got caught up in that, and I think a lot of the things that her adopted mum did were very harmful to her, and also, you know, things like when Jeanette came out as a lesbian, her adopted mum basically disowned her, and they never really reconciled after that happened. But this is a book in which Jeanette looks at that and also looks at her journey to find her real mother, and it's just so good. Like, obviously it also talks about Jeanette's journey to writing and her love of reading and her experiences going to the library, because books weren't allowed in her house unless they were religious books. It's just so good. It's so good. And I think what's really lovely about this is that Jeanette Winterson is talking about these awful things that her adopted mother has done to her, but ultimately this is a book of love. She's not hating on her adopted mum, she's not putting her down, she's very understanding, and I think that's probably something that she's had to develop over the years. But she's very understanding, she's very sympathetic, and you can really feel how much she loved her adopted mother, irrelevant of everything. I would highly recommend this. I think even if you haven't gotten along with Jeanette Winterson's literature, this is a really just normally written memoir. It's not experimental in any way, it's just lovely and it's really inspiring. Then I read Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. This was probably the least favourite book of the whole time. It wasn't for me. I think I probably should have found out a bit more about this before going into it. Basically, I couldn't fully grasp what this was, and I think that kind of irritated me in a way. I was surprised to find when I was reading through that there's not much writing to a page, so it was a fast read for a readathon. So in that sense it was good because I read it on a day when I had a lot on. But it just wasn't for me. It basically follows Marco Polo, but he's a fictionalized character, but he was a real-life Italian explorer who left quite avid documents about his explorations. But yeah, I think this is a fictionalised version of him looking at fictionalised cities that he has visited and describing them. That setup alone seems a bit strange to me. I don't really understand. I don't understand that. The concept just completely went over my head. Also, this is literally just descriptions of these invisible cities, and do not get me wrong, the language is really beautiful and really poetic, and I think somebody who really loves description in books would probably really enjoy this. For me, I hate description. It's something that I generally switch off for and don't really embrace in a book. For me, it's more about characterization and things like that. So yeah, this just was not for me. It was literally a book of description, and as I say, the concept just went completely over my head. That said, the reviews on Goodreads are all 5 and 4 stars. I think there was like 44,000 of them, and I think 46% of those were 5-star reviews. So it's probably more a personal taste thing. Don't let this put you off. But yeah, for me, it just was not the one. It was not the one. Then I read The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. This was my first Sherlock Holmes. I really enjoyed it. It was just a fun, enjoyable mystery. I'm sure a lot of people know what this is about. A man comes to Sherlock Holmes with a mystery where a man has seemingly just dropped dead, but he has found some hound prints next to the man, and there is a mystery around this family that says that there is hounds after them, and Sherlock Holmes obviously goes to explore what this hound situation is, and it goes from there. This was really fun. I really liked it. I wasn't necessarily expecting to. I think the thing with this is that it does fall into a lot of cliches, but then you have to also acknowledge that it created those cliches, so in that sense it's not cliche. I would also say if this were a modern sort of mystery thriller book, it probably wouldn't get very far because it is very simplistic. The majority of it is kind of Sherlock explaining his thought processes and explaining how he's working out all these things, and also there is a bit at the end where we kind of come to a conclusion, we find out who it was and what's been happening. But then Sherlock we skip forward and Sherlock kind of just fills in all the gaps and doesn't really tell us how he found out these things. It's just like this info dump. However, I think given the time it was written, and it was kind of one of the first of this type of book, and as I say, it kind of did structure the way that books like this are created, and all the cliches kind of come from this original text, it's difficult to hate it for that. I still thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would highly recommend if you haven't gotten around to Sherlock Holmes like I didn't. Then I went to Stratford-upon-Avon on the weekend, so on the way there I read Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare. This was the book I read for the film and book adaptation. I actually did get to watch the Baz Luhrmann film of this. I watched the film before I went because I knew I wasn't going to have time once I got back. But actually I'm kind of glad that I did, because I think it's good when you're reading Shakespeare to go into it with the story fresh in your mind, because obviously the language is very different, and you can follow it, but it kind of helps to have that sort of guidance. I have actually never read this in its completion, so it was really nice to sit and read it all through. I have to be honest, I wasn't in the mood when I picked it up at all, but within a few pages it completely had me gripped. The only other, shamefully, Shakespeare that I have read is Macbeth, which I really don't like as a story. I think it's just, yeah, not great. It doesn't necessarily grip me, but I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. And while I was away, I actually bought the complete works of Shakespeare, which I will be reading as well. So this kind of got me started on a bit of a Shakespeare kick, which is really good. And then the last complete book I read was Ernest Hemingway's Winner Take Nothing. This is a short story collection which kind of looks at the darker side of life. It looks at things like hunting, drinking, desolation, you know, all the cheery things. I have to say I've avoided reading much of Ernest Hemingway purely because I think our views are just very opposing, and I've always thought that I wouldn't necessarily get on with him. This collection didn't necessarily change my mind because the first 3 stories are all to do with things about animals that I don't necessarily agree with. The first one is hunting, and the man hunts a lion, for instance, and there's a very graphic scene where he's killing this lion. The second one is about bullfighting as well, which is another reason that I'm hesitant to read Hemingway, because I know he was quite an advocate for bullfighting. But I have to say it did get better. The stories became more about people. Hemingway also seems to have a habit, if he's writing in the first person, of not giving the character who is in the first person a name or any kind of characterization. They're kind of lenses for the situation that they're viewing, which is fine, but it kind of leaves you at a remove, and I think it doesn't help to really grip you into the story. I did enjoy the last 2 stories in here. One called The Gambler, The Nun and The Radio, which I really liked, and there was also one, A Day's Wait, which I really liked. So they were towards the second half of the book. Ultimately it was only a 3-star for me because I think there were more forgettable stories than there were memorable ones. But I certainly think I need to give Ernest Hemingway another shot. I might read one of his novels next and see how I get along with that one. Then I also, because I finished that at about 6 o'clock in the evening, I also picked up something on my Kindle, The Wolves of Willoughby Close by Joan Aiken. I didn't manage to finish that, but I did read 30% of that. I won't speak about that here, but I'll just mention that I did read that as well, because, you know, I'm smug about the fact that I read 7 books plus 30% of another one, but I will talk about that in my wrap up. But yeah, that is how my Booktubeathon went. It was really successful. I think I kind of regretted it in the end because I found that I was pushing myself to read rather than just relaxing, and like I was planning to have a film day, which I didn't get to have because I was reading. But at the same time, I think it's really good because it's kick-started my reading passion again, which just hasn't been with me recently, so that's really exciting. Please let me know down below how your Booktubeathon went, and I will see you next time. Bye!